Sergio and Roldan, welcome to talk about the book The Barcelona School of Ecological Economics and Political Ecology that the two of you edited and that was published recently. With R&D, we've been starting to do this series, interviewing authors and editors of books related to degrowth, like last month the book The Future is Degrowth. We thought that your book is also very relevant for the degrowth movement in Barcelona, so that's why we wanted to talk about it. Thank you very much for taking the time. I wanted to first ask you if you want to present yourselves and then tell me when and how you had the idea to produce this book.
Hi, my name is Roldan Muradian. I'm based in Rio de Janeiro. I work at the Federal University of State of Rio de Janeiro. I'm the current president of the International Society for Ecological Economics.
This is Sergio, Villamayor Tomas. I'm senior researcher at ICTA at the Autonomous University of Barcelona, and I've been mostly working on community-based natural resource management and environmental justice movements.
And about the origin of the book, well, it actually has been a very long process that took about 3 years. The original idea was from Federico de Maria. We thought jointly that it was time already to think about a consolidated volume about the different contributions that have emerged from the Autonomous University of Barcelona through different authors and streams of thought and research lines. And this book is the result of this collaboration between a large number of people. And we have called it the Barcelona School precisely because Barcelona was a kind of epicentric this process, not only of production of new ideas, but also of education and dissemination of those ideas.
It's meant to be a reading companion for students, but also senior scholars who are interested in the work that Roldan mentioned. A large number of scholars who've tried to rethink our relationship with the environment from mostly a critical and socially engaged perspective. So really taking long distance from, environmental economics scholarship, but also some distance from certain strands within ecological economics. This has to do mostly with an emphasis and deep interest in unveiling the biophysical dimensions of the economic system, mostly through social metabolism analysis tools, but also an interest in the political and historical aspects of current capitalist economies and the impact they have on the environment. Last but not least, an interest in an alternative ways of thinking how we organize our societies so we can make our livings more sustainable. But the companion is also a recognition to the trajectory of Joan Martínez Alier. His trajectory, we think, is a paradigmatic example of the school. He started off with studying Muradian movements in Latin America, then he moved into social metabolism analysis, and then into environmental justice, and finally he's connected also with Degrowth. In a nutshell, the Barcelona School and the book has to do a lot with those themes that I can talk later.
Another question I had is if you could explain a bit more what is so specific about this Barcelona school, because with this book you're kind of formally constituting a Barcelona school now, so maybe you can explain a bit what makes it different from schools of thought from other places?
The way we've conceived the school is being founded on three main pillars, which are the three core sections of the book. Those are social metabolism analysis, environmental justice, conflicts, and activism, mobilizing science. And these three pillars have to do a lot with what I just said before. Each of these pillars have developed relatively isolated from each other, but there are strong connections that I will explain in a minute. But let me first go through each of the pillars. So within social metabolism analysis, we have very strong programs like the work carried out by Mario Giampietro around the MUSIASM framework, but also a large number of works that have applied material flow analysis to unveil an equal ecological trade between the North and South. Within the environmental justice, which we could also call an alternatives section or pillar, we find the program around the Environmental Justice Atlas, which is one of the last, if not the last development of Joan Martínez Alier, that has unveiled more than 3,000 environmental justice conflicts around the globe. But we also have nascent programs around urban commons and rural commons as alternatives to mainstream economics, and also a thriving urban environmental justice program. And then within the Activism, Mobilizing Science program, which more than a program is probably a transversal theme or spirit of research, we find the degrowth movement and research, which I won't explain here in detail because I assume you already know quite some about it. But we also find an increasing number of works on decolonizing science and knowledge. So these are the three pillars that have developed relatively solidly from each other, but there are strong connections. And that's probably what makes the school also unique. So recently, a number of scholars from the school released a special issue connecting environmental justice movements and degrowth. But we've also seen works connecting social metabolic analysis that unveil the inequalities generated by, for example, large extractive industries in local economies and communities, and how those communities have responded via social movements, and how those social movements have in turn paved the way for alternative ways of conceiving our economies and human environmental interactions. Probably the most promising part of the school has to do with the interactions between those three pillars.
I think that the particularity of the school is just the dialogue and the exchange between these three pillars, which already existed, of course, before the school. That I think that the school has consolidated a kind of unified vision about the relationship between them. So this emphasis, to see the economy as embedded in a physical world. So to study the economic processes from the biophysical point of view, that means that we stress the flow of energy and materials. But the flows of energy of materials, of course, has a very strong social component dealing with the distribution of environmental burdens and the distribution of economic benefits. So if we include equity concerns within the equation, we see that the metabolic profile, what we call the metabolic profile of the economy, is related to socio-environmental conflicts all around the world. For example, these conflicts have to do with how the pollution is distributed on different social groups, and also how the benefits of those activities, these polluting activities, are distributed along value chains and between world regions. If you move forward in this concern about equity, of course, you will create strong linkages with movements, with environmental justice movements, and that is the third pillar of the school, a very close relationship between science and activism. So I think that it can be a kind of raw summary of the approach, the overall vision of the school.
Yeah, thank you. That's very interesting, this perspective that actually it's the interactions between the different pillars that make the Barcelona school special, no? And from the degrowth lens, I feel like degrowth is maybe also a cross-cutting notion through all of these different pillars. And I was wondering what the two of you think, what the concrete relationship between the Barcelona School of Ecological Economics and Political Ecology and degrowth is.
Well, if we think of, again, the three pillars, I believe there are strong connections. The degrowth movement and research nurtures itself from all three. I mean, if we think of the degrowth, one of the fundamental agenda items in the degrowth program, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jana, one of those is sort of unveiling different ways of thinking about growth, or more specifically, unveiling the pitfalls of measuring growth through, for example, indices like GDP, or valuing nature in monetary terms, and promoting markets as solutions to all environmental problems. Well, some of the tools of social metabolism can be very instrumental to exit the mainstream thinking, mostly encapsulated in money or currencies. I can think of, the work of Claudio Cataneo, for example, or Gonzalo Gamboa, who've used material flow analysis and social multi-criteria analysis precisely to measure the economies at different scales, local, regional, even national, in ways different to monetary terms, and sometimes unveil that some solutions like circular economy do not always deliver as expected. But I believe the degrowth movement is also cross-fitting with environmental justice scholarship a lot, and is getting inspired also by experiences of environmental justice movements that have landed and experimented with alternative livelihoods, like the Chiapas movement, or co-housing experiences in Barcelona. So that's another strong connection, I believe. And well, probably the clearest connection is with the third pillar, the activism mobilizing science. If we think of the Research and Degrowth organization, that's a very clear example of this politically and socially engaged research that the school has been keen on promoting, which also requires thinking of science differently than what some of us and many other scholars have been trained. I mean, mostly thinking outside the boundaries of normal science and thinking, recognizing that science, more frequently than not, is value-laden, and it requires some positionality and sometimes taking sides. Yeah, I think those are three strong connections, I believe, between the degrowth movement and the school pillars.
Well, as I see, it's like a key feature of the school is the connection with social movements in general, as has been stressed several times. And I consider the degrowth movement as one of the possible movements that can be associated with the schools. It's not the only one, of course. Here in Latin America, we have several other types of movements that use other discourses. So while degrowth is pretty much focused on European problems and European strategies, the problems related to high-income countries' consumption and the effects they have on the global level. Here in Brazil and in Latin America in general, and all these countries specialize in the provision of raw materials to the rest of the world. The problems are related, but are others. So there are other movements with which we interact, including indigenous people movements, social justice movements, and plenty of other movements that share. I think they share a critical vision of the expansion of the commodity frontiers and the expansion of unregulated capitalism, especially in areas that are specialized in the production and export of commodities, in agricultural commodities, of mineral commodities. And this movement, they all share a kind of concern about indicators of well-being, what is progress, what social goals should we define for guiding our public decisions, which interests and which way of conceiving the world, which worldviews should determine the way we take public decisions. And they share also a concern about, of course, the metabolic profile of economic process. The expansion of commodity frontiers means the expansion of flows, of international flows of these commodities, and they have, of course, many implications in terms of the way people interact with the territories. The key commonality of all these interactions is that both a focus on social movements as a subject of research. So there is a common interest in studying social movements, but also in the engagement with those social movements through the provision of information and scientific analysis for their fights. But also, as Sergio said, the positionality, taking positions, and politically engaged scholars can perhaps make a more meaningful contribution to change the world, not only to study, but to, through science, provide insights, different insights for fitting public decisions, and also for strengthening the position of social movements all around the world.
I definitely agree that degrowth is only one of the many movements of the pluriverse, that can be connected to the Barcelona School. I'm already gonna get to the last question, which is maybe a bit more personal. How did the process of editing this book go? How was your experience? And in the end, do you have a favorite chapter in the book?
Yeah, thanks. Nice question. It has been a very long process, as I said before, but from my personal point of view, has been very fruitful, not only because of the interaction with Sergio, but also because of the interaction with Joan and all of the authors that are part of this book. The book has more than 30 chapters, so it has been, on the one hand, of course, painful to produce, but on the other hand, very rewarding. And I also like the idea of having, a consolidated school. Let's see whether this idea will prosper or not. But I think one of the main contributions to the book is to propose this approach as an academic school. Sergio also comes from another school, which is the Ostrom School of dealing with collective action and institutional economics, which has been quite influential worldwide. And I think that the Barcelona school has already shown that has a very big influence, at least in the fields of ecological economics and political ecology, not only in Europe but worldwide. Which chapter is my favorite chapter? Well, I like very much the chapter that Joan Martinez Arias wrote for the book. It gives an overall vision about his current research interest, which again are very broad and make all this connection between ecological economics and political ecology. And I think that it's a good example of this interaction between different fields, disciplines, and research interests.
Yeah, very quick note on the school. I believe I totally agree with Roldan. How couldn't I? We thought about this throughout the process, specifically the so what question. Why are we doing this? And from a very practical point of view, trying to trace the boundaries of what we do and what a lot of people affiliated broadly with ICTA have done over more than 30 years is, to take a stock, try not to reinvent the wheel and build on what others have done. And as we said before, try to create synergies and dialogue between the different contributions, call it social metabolism analysis tools, environmental justice movements analysis, and so on. For me, the process was long. I remember Roldan talking to me about this project in a conference in Peru. That was 2019, and we had a pandemic in between that certainly slowed down the process. And I can only be thankful to Roldan for his patience and also all the contributors, because they've been also very patient with the whole process. Chapters, I would say that I like a lot the very first chapters, the prefaces, authored by Herman Daly, Lawrence Whitehead, Ramachandra Guha, Victor Toledo. It's a nice diversity of scholars, although I have to recognize here that we didn't do a good job in gender-wise, so we're bad here. We hope to do better with the next edition of the book. We hope there is one in a few years. Those are a nice personal touch that also speaks a lot about the way science has been carried out at ICTA. There's also a number of other chapters that introduce different themes from a very personal way. I recall now the chapter by Yorgos Kallis on the research and the growth movement, but also a chapter by Sara Mingo-Ria and Rosa Benimelis, Ileana Monterosso, Federica Roveri, that talks about the ups and downs of feminist activist research and share a series of positional reflections. Actually, the chapters are all very diverse in style, and I think that's an added value also of the book.
Thank you so much. You definitely made me want to read some more of the chapters of the book. It's been very interesting to listen to your perspectives on the Barcelona School of Ecological Economics and Political Ecology.
Thank you very much, Vienna.
Thanks for the interest.